And then I've just had 27 years of repeated experiences of just being like, Shari, like 2 + 2 always equals 4 back in that room. But 2 + 2 never equals jealousy or greed, And as soon as I interacted with money, I was like, wait. So that's when I first stumbled into that idea without making any conclusion about it for years later. It's like, wait, this isn't, it turns out it's not about finding the best investment. It's about becoming the best investor. And those are two different things.
You're listening to Everyone's Talking Money, the show that's all about making life richer. Whether you're here to crush debt, build wealth, or finally feel in control of your cash, you are in the right place. Before we dive in, I want to set a little context. Today's guest, Carl Richards, is someone who has completely changed the way I work as a financial planner. He's changed the way I think about money and talk about money. If you're not in the financial services industry, you may not know his name, but you may have seen his simple little sketches, circles, squares, arrows, squiggles. And these sketches somehow explain the messiest parts of money better than a 400-page book ever could. That's Carl. That's his impact. Early in my career, his writing made something click for me. Money is emotional first and mathematical second. Humans don't make decisions like calculators. And thank goodness, because calculators are boring. Real people feel fear, excitement, stress, hope, and all of that shows up in our money long before we run the numbers, look at statements, and start paying attention. So this conversation isn't just an interview for me, it's personal. Carl's work shaped how I guide my clients at GWA Wealth and why this show sounds the way it does. Simple language, less shame, more humanity. In part 1, we're talking about the exact moment Carl realized that money isn't a math problem, why smart people still make emotional decisions, and the mindset shift that turned him into the sketch guy we know today. This one is special. Let's get into it. Carl, you've built a career showing people that money is way more emotional than it is mathematical. Can you take me back to the moment that truth really landed in you when you realized the numbers were only half the story?
Yeah, that's a really fun question. So I didn't realize it at the time. Like this, there's always this tendency, I think, when we look back to make up cute little stories about how it all made sense, right? But at the time, I didn't realize it. But the moment that I sort of stumbled upon that idea was so there's a little bit of backstory. I applied in college. I was an undeclared major, and I was looking for a job. And my wife and I ran across an ad that we thought it was a security guard ad. We thought it had something to do with like being a mall cop or something. And I went to apply for it, and I got like halfway through the interview and they hadn't asked me anything about my kung fu skills or anything. And I was like, they're asking me about things I didn't really know much about at the time. I mean, I may have heard of them, but I couldn't tell you what they were, like stocks and bonds. And it turns out the ad said securities, not security. I didn't really know the difference, but that got me a job. I made it through the interview, which tells you a lot about the applicant pool. But I got the job, and it was at Fidelity Investments' big national call center in Salt Lake City, Utah. And once I got there, I felt very sort of unmoored, sort of like, I don't know. And I was looking around for clues the whole time. What is this? And I saw lots of calculators and spreadsheets. So I was like, okay, this is a math job. I think I can figure that out. And if you fast forward just a couple of weeks, it was back in 95, long time ago, when Netscape, which most of your listeners this doesn't even ring a bell, but think of like Google, or think of Safari or Google Chrome or Firefox before any of that was around. It was like the very first browser ever. And I was in training when Netscape stock IPO'd. And they called us out of the training room because the call volume was so high. So you can just imagine sort of walking out of a room with math everywhere, right? Calculators and spreadsheets. And then you walk onto the trading floor, and it was crazy. I just remember thinking, what is this? I do remember thinking that, just like being sort of surprised. I remember like, we're not in Kansas anymore. It's like, because it was not math. I mean, people were yelling and excited and mad and, making all sorts of crazy decisions. And I didn't make any grand conclusion, but that was the beginning of like, what is this, right? What is this thing we call money? And then I've just had 27 years of repeated experiences of just being like, Shari, like 2 + 2 always equals 4 back in that room, but 2 + 2 never equals jealousy or greed, and as soon as I interacted with money, I was like, wait, so I think that's when I first stumbled into that idea without making any conclusion about it for years later.
So how did you get from Fidelity, that center, to becoming an advisor? And and where you worked, was the emotional part of it even part of the conversation, or were your peers like, what are you talking about? Because where you worked is very stocks and sell and the what we think of when we think of advisors is like buying, trading, selling, all of that stuff.
Totally. Yeah, no, it was, I was at Fidelity for a while, and then I left to go work for a big brokerage firm. We don't necessarily have to name it, but it has a bull as its symbol and is owned by a bank. And there I was even more like in the investment world, but I kept noticing that there was these weird little behaviors. And that was where my first like work and what ended up being my first book, The Behavior Gap, was like people would, despite knowing better, and I do this too. So I want to be really clear. Like I have deep empathy for this problem. Like despite knowing better, they would make the same mistake over and over. I call it the big mistake. They would buy high and sell low. And as an advisor, I got all this training, and I learned like years later, I could tell you the story, but it's a long story, so we won't. But essentially all this training taught me to do was be very disciplined. I had built a disciplined, rigorous way, and I had the best training in the world. Like I went and got all the designations, institutional consulting, like all that stuff. All I'd done was built a very disciplined, rigorous way to buy high and sell low and charge people money for it. Because in investing, there's all these funny systems wound up where we are hardwired to get more of what gives us security or pleasure. And this is a genetic hardwiring that's kept us alive as a species. So thank heavens for it, right? Like it's been good for us. Get more of what gives us security or pleasure. And we're hardwired to run away as fast as we can from anything that causes us fear or danger. Like for me, like a grizzly bear breaking through the door where we live in the mountains, right? That wiring that kept us alive as a species doesn't work very well when it comes to investing, because what gives you security and pleasure is stuff that's recently done well, right? So that's when I started noticing it, even in the investment world. It's like, wait, this isn't, it turns out it's not about finding the best investment. It's about becoming the best investor. And those are two different things.
What were the conversations with your clients like? Coaching them, I'm assuming you had to do a lot of coaching to get them not as focused on the investment, but become a good investor.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get there, but this was just my entry point into the world of money, was through the investments. Like it's now the least interesting part of the work you and I do, obviously, but it's still something that people like, all the financial pornography networks and the hand wavy stuff is all about investments, investing, finding the best investment. Well, the kind of coaching that we would do is early on, you just start to link. If you want someone to say no to bad behavior, the key is to give them a much bigger yes. So it's not, and this applies to, this applies to food, social media use. You don't say no, 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 no. It's not resisting, because that which you resist will persist. It's sort of like they call in the academic literature, they call it the white bear problem. If I say, and we've said like purple elephant or whatever, like if I tell you, whatever you do, Shari, right now, do not think of a white bear. Like the act of resisting will make sure that you see a white bear in your head. So instead of resisting the temptation to sell when everybody's nervous now this is assuming you're invested like an adult, right? Like you're broadly diversified. You've built a portfolio based on your goals and your values, which is your deeper yes. The last thing you want to do is sell out of that when the market goes down, because you're broadly diversified. If you're not broadly diversified, like all bets are off, and that's a different conversation. So the coaching was around like, wait, why are we doing this in the first place? Let's reconnect you. You're out in the branches right now, and there's a windstorm, right? The branches are like you turn on the news and everybody's yelling. And this could be both greed or fear, right? Like crypto, 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 like exciting. So you're on the branches. Let's reconnect you to the trunk of the tree. And what's that? Well, that's your goals, your values. Why are you investing this money in the first place? That seems to give us a little bit of breathing room. So we can say like, kind of like heck yes to something instead of no, no, no to the other thing.
That conversation today, especially with so many more people are focusing on the emotions of money and the behavior behind it. But like when you were initially having those conversations, that was like so ahead of its time, right? It was just, what's your portfolio doing? Well, how's it performing? What stock should we buy?
It's so hard to even explain how far ahead, like how basic the conversation was back then. You're right.
Did others look at you like you're crazy for having these conversations?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because it's hard to even, I was doing this with a group of certified financial planners that I was speaking to a little while ago. I took them back to that history of it. Like back then, it really was like you refer people in the investment world, people even referred to themselves like financial advisor was this fan. It's like you're a stockbroker. And I went around to all the, because I was always doing this. I was always being kind of pesky, trying to figure out what my job was. Like that seemed like a reasonable idea. And I went around to all the senior, like successful stockbroker, financial advisor people. And I would ask them like, what's the job? And I got answers like have a hunch, buy a bunch, but do it with 2 phones. Like that's the kind of world. And then there was this revolution and Nobel Prize winning research actually that said it's not about the individual stock, it's about the portfolio. So the individual merits of each investment are important, but they're also very important in terms of the interaction of the whole portfolio. And then we went one step further where we're like, in fact, your portfolio should match your goals. That was that was Nobel Prize winning research. And now it seems so silly. So yeah, I remember I got made fun of for getting my CFP. They all were just like, what's a waste of time? Like, what are you doing? But I was just lucky because I was just on the cusp of that wave of changing the way we charged, like being more aligned with the clients instead of just hidden commissions. And I was just right at the front end of that. So I never, like everything, well, I shouldn't say never. I can't recall ever charging a commission. It was all, aligned and open and transparent with the client. That was new. It was new. And so was the idea of financial planning. I remember like people had to fly in from New York, the financial planning team. So yeah, it was the Wild West back then.
And I can only imagine because I even feel like now we're still ahead talking about goals,
the Wild West.
talking, it's still the Wild West. It's still fee for advice, fiduciary, that still is new. Like that, not every advisor does that. And to your point of, to your point of every advisor you talk to, they all said a different thing of what their job was.
Yeah.
And that's still true today. Yeah. And I think that's really hard for the average person that's like, I want help with my money, but I don't know where to go because I don't know if this person's going to do for me what I think I need, or if I even have enough money to even talk to them, or how our relationship is, or any of that.
For sure. I remember thinking that early on, maybe after 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years in the business, I remember thinking, man, if it's this hard for me to navigate from the inside, like imagine, because I remember I spent a whole period trying to understand, okay, what does the person who calls themselves an insurance agent do? What does the person who calls himself a private banker do? And trying to understand that even from the inside. And I don't think I'm a dumb guy. So like, I remember just being like, this must be really hard for people. And the column that I wrote for the New York Times, I did that every week for 10 years. And every couple of years we'd try to write a column with my editor on how to pick a financial planner. And it's turns out it's like really hard because there's some pointers. I think some of the words you've already used, right? People who certified financial planners, a good starting place. People who are. I think the most important thing about fees is that they're transparent. There could be different ways of charging, but you should know. And there's 2 questions if this is helpful. One question is, how does the advisor in this situation, how how do you pay them? And that's one question. A second question is, in total, how do they get compensated? Sometimes those are not the same thing. And I think it's fair to say in an ideal world, they'd be as close to the same thing as possible. Like the only way they're getting compensated is directly from the fee that you're paying them for their advice. And you have you have an idea what that is. But sometimes there are reasons that that may not be the case. The thing that matters is that they're willing to talk about it, right? That they're willing to be transparent about it. Because there's always, you've got to keep in mind, anybody who says they're in a conflict, like there's no conflict of interest, is somebody you should run from, right? Because there's always if I charge by the hour, I've got a conflict to maybe I'll be tempted to make it take a little longer. If I charge, so the key is not to find a conflict-free relationship. It's to find one that's completely open and transparent.
And that when finding an advisor, I say it's like dating. Like you can take a referral, you can have a recommendation from a family member, but just because someone says that they're a great guy doesn't mean they're going to become your boyfriend right away, right? So you can interview the advisor, but have these questions ready. But it really is dating, and it should be someone. And I say, like, they should be you should like them enough that when something major happens in your life, money usually is involved in it in one way or another. And you should like them enough and be comfortable enough around them that they're one of your first 5 phone calls and you want to call them. Yeah. And so really having those questions when you're on the date with them initially, having those questions prepared and knowing what to ask and knowing what you want the answer to be is really, really important. And I think that helps to just take away a lot of the intimidation when it comes to just someone entering this financial planning space.
I agree. I think one of the things I finally settled on writing about how to hire a planner was also like, you watch their behavior in the first meeting. If you feel like, if you leave feeling like you were thoroughly diagnosed, you were heard, listen to, ask good questions. I kind of often refer to it as you're walking to the car, maybe even a little confused by the grace of the whole experience, or like, what, you went in kind of expecting it to be a little bit like a used car sales experience, like you're going to have to defend yourself. You've got your hand on your wallet, you're protecting, and you leave feeling like, oh my gosh, you might even use the word lovely. Like that was nice. And you feel like that person gets me. If you feel that way, like, okay, that's interesting. That's a really good sign, right? Like a really good pointer. If you feel like that person tried to sell you blue and then they said, you don't like that, that's fine, I got green. And then they said, no, let's try orange. And they were just chucking prescriptions. I mean, think about it as a doctor. If a doctor just chucks prescriptions at you until you finally give in, right? Like that's not the experience you want. So I kind of like that too. Like, a little bit less about what they say and a little bit more about how they act.
You mentioned your column. How did that come about? You're the sketch guy. So your drawings make complex financial ideas feel accessible. And a lot of it is the emotion behind our finances. How did that come about?
Yeah, Shari, I think I hope this will be helpful for listeners just from the perspective of like, I have no idea, right? Like I said earlier, if you sometimes feel like, I don't know what I'm going to be when I'm going to grow, like I'm still saying that to my kids, like my adult kids. I'm like, gosh, I wish I knew so if you feel that way, you're not alone, right? Like there was it causes me a lot of problems when I see people painting success stories as this grand vision that they knew all along. And because it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong. And I've even gotten to the point sometimes where you like, something's wrong with my thinking. I'm not abundant enough. Or if I just fix my thinking, I don't know. I'm sure that plays a role. But for me, it's been more about like noticing when people are asking for things and noticing where I feel good. I call it tailwind, noticing when I'm doing something that feels, it's not that it feels easy, because sometimes they're very hard, but it feels maybe in flow, even, to use another overused, description. But tailwind, where it feels like, oh, maybe I should do more of that. And so that's what happened with the column. I was noticing this behavioral problem in my work with investors. And I started, every time I'd get a question twice. So the second time I got the question, I would write my answer down and I would put it up. In the early days, I'd put it up on a blog. And if the third person asked me, I would tell them too. And then I would send them to the blog. I'd send them the link. It just felt like an efficiency thing to me. And I found I was really enjoying it. And so I did that for a couple of years and no one was listening, right? Like my mom and my sister, and I found out later my sister was lying. Actually, my mom was reading it. My sister wasn't. And then relatively out of the blue, and again, 2 or 3 years of, if not weekly, if not, yeah, it was at least every week. I was putting this thing up. I had no idea if anybody was listening. I tried not to care. And then I got an email from a financial advisor that was reading it, who I did not know. His name's Kent. I should send him a gift every year for the rest of my life. I didn't know Kent. Kent sent my blog post to the editor at the New York Times of the Your Money column. I've talked to the editor is a good friend of mine now, and we've talked at length about this experience because he's like, I don't know. I get hundreds of those a day. I don't know why I opened that one. And on top of that, I don't know why I clicked on the link. And he did. Ron, the editor, sent me a note saying, hey, I love these. Would you consider them doing for us? And I'm a kid from the hills in Utah. I don't know anything about journalism in the New York Times, but I knew enough to say yes and figure it out later. The first initial plan, again, like the initial plan was like, we'll just take questions for a week and that would be it. And at the end of the week, I enjoyed it. And I said, hey, would you like to keep going? And he was like, sure. How often? I said, how about once a week? It's like, won't you run out of things to say? And I said, I don't know. Let's find out. Right. And that was 10 years every week. So, and the books were kind of the same. It was sort of like, there was no grand strategy. It was just noticing where I'm being pushed. Sometimes it was a 2x4 upside the side of the head, right? Like it wasn't a subtle push, but that's how it happened.
And were your sketches automatically part of it? Like, did you find yourself drawing this out with your clients as well?
Yeah, that's how it started. The whole reason I even started this was I'm not a doodler. I have no art background. I had no idea that this was a thing I even cared about. What I care about is I now know that what I care about is taking complex things and trying to like go into the middle of them, like get all messy with it, like read the academic literature, talk to lots of people, consider the nuance and the edge cases. And I'm making a face because it makes me feel that way. Like I love being in there, but I want to get out of there as soon as I can. And the sketch was the way to get out. Was like, okay, wrap this up in a simple drawing. And I remember doing that the first time with clients who were looking at me with blank stares. Super smart. So I know exactly who it was. Super smart, successful people looking at me with blank stares. And it dawned on me for the first time, I had seen those blank stares before, but I'd never had the realization that it was me, right? That I was the problem. Because these people were so smart and successful, I was like, wait, they're smart and successful. It must be me. And I got up out of an act of desperation and drew on the whiteboard. For the first time. I didn't even know there was a whiteboard behind those oak panels in the conference room. Drew on a whiteboard, circle, square, arrow, and they were like, oh, we get it now. And that moment, I was like, I didn't think I should do this for the rest of my life. I just thought, maybe I'll try that again. And that led to the blog post and then to the column and then to the book.
I want to wrap part one by saying this. Carl's work is a big reason why I practice the way I do. If you've ever wondered why I talk so much about emotions, values, and decision-making, and not just the markets, that started with conversations like this. You heard us dive into the behavior gap, the way our wiring pushes us to buy high and sell low, and the importance of finding your deeper yes. If you take anything from today, let it be this. You don't need to become perfect with money. You just need better systems than your emotions. In part two, we go deeper into Carl's creative process, his years writing for the New York Times, the power of permission, and the real life stories that changed people's lives. It's honestly one of my favorite conversations I've ever had. If you want to support building a plan that works with your humanity, not against it, connect with me on my Instagram at Everyone's Talking Money and catch up on past episodes anytime at everyone'stalkingmoneypodcast.com. I'll see you in part two.